Hello, everybody. This is Dean Bell with Dean Kevin, and we're here with the great witness, Kevin Smith. The adventure series is, and he's going to be sharing experiences with us, and we'll comment, ask questions, and again, see if we can become more aware, because awareness is everything, and that just makes a whole lot of difference, understanding what's going on in the world today, particularly. So again, welcome, Kevin, to the show.
In previous real side experiences, I had revealed how I and groups had been approaching Native American Indians on the real side. Part of our activities on the real side do involve the scouring of creation from one end to the other, through all the dimensions of it, to primarily extend the opportunity of becoming more aware, to promote the real guides and the true reality that they represent, a true reality we all represent as the real awareness that we actually are. Real awareness that is a part of this isness true reality. Although this is the real purpose of the simulated creational realms, to recognize the ears from the comparisons that everything, every idea created within them provides. It is a process that takes the time that it does for each individual. As the real awareness so decides to recognize the isness that it is, after it has had enough creational experience through its disconnected personal self, and go through then the necessary steps to grab the attention of the personal self, and then a facing and releasing of all the personal self's constructed consciousness of idea tap lines. That full awareness of everything the consciousness and creation comprises of be known, and if released, then unbound too, and then the final step of recognizing the ears through the real awareness now reconnected with all the simulated experiences now affording the comparisons required to do so. But at this moment, with a simulator being so very advanced in its state of deterioration, as the consciousness that overall affects it is so very restricted with ideas that reflect then a simulator in an equally as restricted a state, so there is rather a diminishing window of opportunity before the restricting consciousness continually impacts in on itself to the inevitable simulator effect consequence, that of implosion. And so, at this moment, all beings, in all the various body forms their awareness inhabits, have been extended and are constantly being offered the opportunity on the real side, through the real guides and all those agreeing to participate in providing this standing real in recognition of the ears opportunity. And despite perhaps a process of awareness and ears recognition that will be rather a long and arduous journey, those that do decide to step up and take it on are removing their agreement from the consciousness. A consciousness that through its restricted construction is contributing toward simulator demise. So, for every being that steps up, that takes the risk to see more than their consciousness, regardless of where they are on their awareness processes, agreement is withdrawn from the consciousness. For if you are wanting to be more than your consciousness, you are removing your decision to remain that which the consciousness comprises of, the restriction by which you have agreed to construct it, and that which effects as simulator deterioration. It would be the equivalent then of having a computer game you have always played, that you have played for such a long time with all the other players, that so much has additionally been added to the game through all the decisions made within it by each respective player, that the overall game is very slow, it lags, it struggles to process all the files of ideas that overwhelm it. But then you decide to withdraw from that particular shared game and play something else. Your character and its consciousness still are there, but the removing of your awareness from that which you always have known to that which is unknown and something else would be like having an inactive player in the game, that by virtue of its inactivity in the game has lightened the load, so to speak, is less a data impact on the overall game. And for every individual who steps aside from immersion and agreement with the consciousness, so this is less a restricting effect that expresses as the state of the simulator. The simulator deterioration can be offset by degrees and fractions. The implosion could be averted, and everyone then has more time to recognize the ears from the simulator that has been granted more longevity. And of course also, much by way of agreement is a sort that can assist with the situations that Earth and many planets like it are faced with, the destructive agendas of the reptilian simulator controllers. Agreements gleaned from many of the reptilians, in fact, who have seen the simulator decay for themselves, and wish to rather step up and assist in averting what would be an implosion they will be caught up in also, as they will find themselves in a darkness where they can't create anything before much longer, as it will be with all those who remain with the personal self-consciousness and choose to be the unconscious effects of themselves. So every being is precious, regardless of what they have done up until this moment. Every moment is new now, and it's what we are deciding, focusing on, and where our intent lies in every moment that's important. As in reality, our intent in the new moment that is now is what we are, but must play out in simulated creation as it does, which takes a few moments through cause and effect. so must then focus on the intent that we wish to be our position in life be maintained for it to become so, as we rather are caught up in a simulation that simulation we are here, despite what we are now according to our intent, the slow simulator rollout can make it so that we have the opportunity to change the intent. And if it is a focus on the ease, if it is universal positioning that is our real intent, then we must be focused to maintain it as we go through the simulation to that end. The simulation rather catches up with our intent in a way, even though we are our intent now in isness actuality. Duane has told us how the Native American Indians are precious and important, as they have many affiliations and agreements that involve and incorporate many beings and body types, including alien species. So agreements secured from the Native Americans will have very beneficial life and awareness consequences, as others will be drawn in also through their associations with them. A lot of agreement could swing in beneficial with life directions. The Native Americans do harbor attitudes in regards to others, especially the white man, understandably enough, as the white man had been marketed by the controllers to destroy and subjugate them. Consequently, approaching them isn't so easy, and on a previous real side experience I shared, I revealed how I rather was able to enter their simulated experience on the real side in directly through a backdoor agreement they had with the controllers. For the overall simulator consciousness is in agreement with the controllers, which allows them to feature in everyone's simulation and do what they do. And so effectively everyone's simulation is tied with the controllers and intermingled. As such then, should we engage with the controllers, agree with them on the real side, we also agree with the entire package of their consciousness of agreements, agreements that extend to all in the simulator practically, including the Native American Indians. And so, extending agreement to any controller, you not only take them on and what they are into a simulated experience you now are in, as it is with any idea you agree with, anything created that you agree with, you must then experience, and the specific nature of that idea, but you take on all idea agreements their consciousness also harbors. You can now feature through your agreement with the controllers in the experiences of all those they have agreements extended to also. Backdoor agreements. A little like a file with a million other files attached to it, that as you incorporate the file, so you automatically take on all the million files it is interconnected with into your program, into your simulation, and now have access to them all. That was how I approached the Native Americans in that previous experience, but they were rather the recipient of sustained, real-side dark force abuse that a group and I also agreed to assist with, as to assist others to take on the effects they really had decided for themselves, to shoulder their karmic burden, to transfer an idea agreement file that was of them being attacked from their consciousness to ours. So we are then the recipients of what they would have experienced. But for those with greater awareness, so can they better handle effects that are taken on, through a real awareness that can deal with anything its personal self goes through, assuming there are no conflicting agreements through the personal self that hamper the real awareness and its abilities and effectiveness. Taking on the karma then makes sense if those we assist in such a way intend to step up and participate in life in ways that benefit all awareness, or we are just taking on unnecessary karma from individuals that are choosing to remain in creation anyway, as that would be the equivalent of saving someone from a suicide attempt, but they retain the inclination to want to jump from another cliff and will indeed do so. Like how guides won't remove certain tap lines. Effectively, they are taking on the karma of them if they know the individual will reinsert the tap lines again, for taking karma is taking on effects others have really decided on, even if they are attacks, but which are generally effected from subconscious agreements. And taking on karma or effects can't be done without agreement either, even if it would be in an individual's best interests. We never saw what came of our agreement to assisting the Indians in that previous experience, as we stationed ourselves in their simulation and waited for an inevitable dark force assault. But it's as though perhaps we had been successful, as was my impressions, and that then the Indians were agreeable to stepping up with the guides and Dwayne. However, for those just beginning their awareness process, there lies vulnerability, a vulnerability that is through a consciousness, with all its agreements to the controllers and their agreed to a power over the individual that translates as the controllers able to enter the individual's experience at any time and attack them. Only when individuals connect more with their real awareness, as they learn to step from the consciousness of agreements to the controllers, can they be aside from all simulated attacks in the true reality of their real awareness, where nothing simulated can be so, as there are no ideas agreed upon that effect such. And even on the simulated side, we may open ourselves to attacks, but as the tap lines unravel, which are that we are letting go of everything the consciousness comprises of, despite utilizing its mechanics, we are less resigned to agreements of the consciousness that dictate and allow that we can be attacked and defeated by others. And even if tap lines remain yet to be addressed, that have us unable to handle certain situations and individuals, can we simply learn to move into the nowness of the real awareness and withdraw from the simulated personal side and be beyond assault? And so it seems to be the case that the dark forces would take their opportunity to attack the stepping up Native American Indians, and again we can offer assistance, but within the parameters of the agreements of those we are attempting to aid. If a consciousness clung to dictates that a controller can enter the experience at any time through agreement and have a power to do what they want, this is a free will decision to experience as such, and no one can then assist an individual who has effectively decided to experience being attacked. Although in the previous experience, although at the mercy of the controllers through agreements yet to be addressed, and a consciousness yet to be better managed with the ability to stand in the real awareness recognized, the Native Americans had requested assistance, which translated as they not deciding to experience that which their consciousness effects in regards to a controller attack, and although resigned to the attacks, despite what they wanted to not happen, countermanded by a consciousness that's agreements dictate otherwise, we could at least step in through agreement to our assistance and take on the karma, the effects of the attack. The nature of this attack in this recent real side experience upon the stepping up Indians seemed to be along technological lines, as though from the real side where everything starts from, so had the very Native Americans we had defended and were stepping up been somehow debilitated with a technology of a kind. Agreements through the consciousness that allowed the dark forces to attack them in whatever way they wished, and this seemed to be the preferred method at this moment, for I would have a real awareness aside from the simulator view that I wouldn't be directly featuring in the experience, but just observing, and I would enter a kind of high-tech containment facility, and it would be extensive and consist of endless, tubular-shaped, upright cubicles, designed to contain individuals where technology could be applied, and standing in each of these cubicles, with various wiring and such applied to their bodies, would be the very Native American Indians that had agreed to step up. It was some kind of technological control, a little like robotization, where the consciousness is effectively controlled utterly, its very thoughts and emotions installed like programs, as opposed to being generated by the individual. A loss then of free will, but then for the unconscious individual, they just operate on pre-programmed ideas of consciousness anyway, and only through the real awareness would other ideas and decisions be applied that differ from those the consciousness comprises of. The consciousness is just mechanics. We program it a certain way, then experience the affected simulation, and most will sit in the same general consciousness programming for lifetimes. It must then be the real awareness that changes the idea the consciousness comprises of, for the purposes of effecting different experience. That awareness of more can be so. Really then, an individual who is disconnected from the real awareness and content to sit in their programmed consciousness of routine would be one that could have the consciousness of ideas, of thoughts, completely managed and indeed technologically supplied, and wouldn't realize the difference. But with a real awareness connection established, the consciousness can be compromised, but the awareness process not, although it will adversely impact the process to a degree, as the effect-generating mechanisms of the consciousness will be being fired off external of our decision to do so, to the extent that we may have to abandon the physical vehicle if through it we are unable to step from the illusions of the personal self, as the thoughts constantly being activated keep us from the nowness of our real position, and only then, on the real side, beyond the controlled consciousness, could we be beyond this technological influence. But for those just stepping up, easier to lock them down technologically before they recognize more so their real awareness and how to step into the true reality of themselves. And this was the situation here, as the purposes of these technological cubicles were to ultimately have a kind of technological collar applied around the neck, facilitated through the insertion of all that was required for this to be so, through the wiring and cables that were inserted into the individuals. This had the Native Americans completely oblivious, as though in a trance, just as most of the one-dimensional, unaware, unconscious masses present as, on the real side generally, except in this case, more so, to the extent of being completely prone and drone-like, like inactive Borg characters from Star Trek, standing in their cubicles, and not even carrying out the routines of the consciousness, as even the unconscious unaware will do on the real side. This complete locking down of the consciousness, prior to real awareness connection established, was such that agreements then couldn't be extended through the personal self for assistance. However, despite this, it seems there must have been an agreement loophole somewhere, for the scene switched, and a group and I had infiltrated a technological chamber of a kind that was in some way connected with the plight of the collared Indians, and here we would lay waste to the machinery, destroying it utterly, while fending off numerous robotic-type creatures of various types, descriptions, and forms, evidently deployed to defend this tech chamber and that which it contained. As we destroyed the machinery, so would the very Native American Indians who were collar-bound in the other chamber begin to manifest in our presence, as though the destruction of this chamber and what it housed was affording the means of the Indians' liberation, although only a handful of them would manifest in the chamber with us, and indeed would proceed to assist us as we smashed the place to smithereens and battled the various assorted robotic creatures. It seemed that our efforts had only liberated a handful of Indians, perhaps suggesting there were other chambers to be vanquished, or that maybe there had been a time window before the collars rendered the Indians beyond our help, and we had been unsuccessful in getting the job done in time, though only the simulated side deals with time and cause to effect limitation, and only that is so through what has been agreed to. Through the nowness of the real awareness, a real awareness that is through all simulation, everything created in the nowness of its reality, can we revisit and retry efforts that we had perhaps previously failed. As with everything being available and within the nowness of the real awareness isness, and we can actually redo a failed effort as many times as is necessary, and in this case it made sense to do so, awareness always seeking to support the awareness it is, as it is expressed through all simulation and body vehicles, so as the personal self allows, is open to assistance, as it pertains to a decided awareness process, can the awareness operate through other simulated vehicles to render assistance, through personal selves that are not so hampered with agreements that will disallow the effectiveness of the real awareness to operate. And so we will see what comes of this, but ultimately the Native Americans had decided to step up, at least this particular group of them, that numbered several thousand or so by my estimation. And although instantly locked down by the controllers through technological consciousness controlling means, we had the agreement to assist as best as the parameters of the agreements allowed, and were in the process then of liberating the Indians. I never saw the culmination of our efforts, how many we did indeed manage to set loose, but perhaps will be shown more at a later moment, and we will see then how things progress regarding the Native American Indians. Dwayne, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Those that are stepping up, that have the intent to do so, and focus on this, Those are the people having these experiences and helping things along. So it's very important. We see what's going on in the world. We check everything out. We collect the information. But it's not about rearranging these things that are taking place. It's about really getting to the individuals and them making the choice. That's the whole idea. It's not about what they're presenting, like how I'm using Sheriff Mac as a reference. It's not about so much what he is presenting, but it does have an effect on people, etc. But it's really getting to the heart of them, and a step at a time. That's what I'm trying to do here on the real side. That's my intent. Not just to glaze over, thinking how I know this knowledge and these people are helping us, etc., but actually do something to prompt them to see what we're doing, so that there can be some kind of activity there that's beneficial for everything, and not just one little thing, like people's liberties and other situations on the physical realm, but the bigger picture is the ears, as this is where everything comes from. Everyone decides their fate, etc., and the world is just a place. There's no la-la land or life here really. The only life there is your real awareness. All life is awareness, and so we have activities here, but those are all made up, and it just depends upon how it all comes together to provide a real benefit for people to reference the true reality, not just truths that are made up or old wisdom, etc., that sound good, because all they are is just rearranged words, belief ideas, ceremonies, traditions, etc. Each person decides, and here's the real opportunity. And so, as I've come along through this in my life, and been reintroduced this lifetime, I've taken the advantage of stepping up and doing everything I can. This is number one, and it's mainly to recognize the all is and bring this in, bring something in that relates to the struggling and suffering that people are going through, because we're all in it, and this is how you become more aware, because life recognizes you as to what you're doing. That's very real. Don't forget that. You can think whatever you want, but life recognizes your intent and what you're really doing, what you're assuming, and all these little funny things. It's not about good or bad. You decide to face it. You decide how you're going to face it and make your decisions. That's where the real awareness comes in, as opposed to just creating ideas. To really stand real, to face that true reality and see what's really taking place throughout all life. That's the big adventure.
So, yeah, we have worked with Indians before, Dwayne, with the funding, and when I was in the Bay Area, worked with the Ohlone Mutsun tribe. They're a tribe of Ohlones that still there's some of them left from the mission days. They had a place Morgan Hill, south of Morgan Hill, where the mission was up there, one of the missions. I think there was, what, 23 missions in California up and down the state. Well, in Morgan Hill, there was one, and the Indians used to escape from there and go to this valley where they had a safe haven. It was a real remote valley of oak trees and mountainous with oak trees, etc. And that's where they still have land there. And we were working with them for a while. They did some fairs with us. Of course, they're advocating for their tribes in their own way. But I just wanted to mention how when the white men came, and most of them, the story goes, most indigenous people were very friendly and open-hearted to these white men. And the white men took advantage of them. So if they had been a little bit more maybe careful, or, you know, had a little bit more discrimination, they maybe wouldn't have had this attitude that they do now, because it's real prevalent in the Indians, where they have this attitude that they were victims and taken advantage of and stuff. So if they'd been more careful, I'm not saying this or that, I'm just saying that it could have been another scenario, then they would have maybe not had such a strong attitude. But as it was, white man was a new, you know, and they came with armor, and the Spaniards had horses and weapons that they'd never seen before. So of course this was pretty, like, these were gods, you know, so they worshiped them sometimes, but at least were very hospitable toward them. And right now we're working with a lady from Oklahoma. She's Cherokee. She has a lot of Indian blood in her, but primarily Cherokee. Half of Oklahoma is like Cherokee, because they pushed the Indians off the good lands into these desolate lands. And Oklahoma is kind of pretty desolate. You know anything about the states, it's not that much there. So they pushed them off what they thought was good land into barren lands, and etc. Sometimes it turned out that they were rich with oil, but whatever the case, working with a lady there now, and you're working with them, Kevin. Thank you for doing on the real side. They are, you know, if they would hold to their environmental kind of support that they've had all through the ages, it would be good for them if they were focused on that more than the injustice, and also keeping their tribal customs. A lot of them say that they just sort of basically there because of their ceremonies and traditions. That's what holds them together. Well, yes, but they could also be, you know, supporting the environment, and that makes a lot of sense because that's real. The ceremonies are made up, whatever. And then the other fellow that I'm thinking of, well, I'm reading the Luther Standing Bear. He's very good in describing the Indians and their nature and their temperament. So Russell Means was another one. He's an actor and an Indian activist. I think he died 10 years ago or something, 8 years ago, but he played in The Last of the Mohicans. He was like on the hilltop fighting Wes, another Indian star. Forget his last name. He played in a lot of movies, but they had a final fight scene up on the top. Wes was the bad guy, and I think Russell was the good guy. But he was very articulate, and he went to Congress, and he talked for the Indians and tried to get them more justice, etc. So this is just one of the groups, we're contacting that have huge potential for, and that's why we're down here in Mexico, because the people are more or less, more indigenous, more community oriented, more simple farmers, agriculture, more with nature, generally speaking, at least in the rural parts. So thank you. And maybe Tim has something.
Oh, when I was about 5 years old, we moved up to Whidbey Island. It was out in the woods. It had already been logged for the first growth timber by the time my father had bought it from an old elderly man. But there was a Indian lady that lived all by herself in a log cabin down the road from where we lived, Edna White. She was a very nice person. She gave me a toy I really liked for a long time when I was little. It was a rubber frog anyway. But yes, she was, there wasn't any other Indians around, I guess, anymore where I was. But she was pretty much all by herself, and she was, I guess, fine with her life there in her log cabin.
Yeah, some of these, like Raj from Oklahoma, the one that we're connected with through Sheriff Mack, I mean, just a few of these people can be leaders in their community, Indian community, because they're somewhat passive in a way. I mean, they have their attitudes and stuff, but that's about, a lot of times that's it. So when a leader comes, then they would tend to follow him or to her to see more. So we'll see what happens. Always, we'll see what happens with all this with the Indians. It's very interesting because of their history. They have a very clean history with how they lived. So go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, the Native American Indians generally on the real side are far less limited than the average unconscious one-dimensional individual, because one of my encounters I had with a group of Native American Indians was going back several years now, that I recounted on a UK open Skype. And I remembered I came into this, it was as though the scene was set as though this was a position that only those of a certain degree of awareness could access. And so that would also incorporate the Native American Indians, which indicated they had an awareness to a degree, even though they perhaps did not have access or knew of the references of the ears, because we were on this island and I was with this aware group of individuals, and the Native Americans were almost occupying an area of the island, but they weren't associated with us in any way, but still had the awareness that allowed them access to it. And but initially, when I was on this island, I was exploring it, and I didn't realise at first they were Native American Indians, because as I approached this area of the island, I saw what looked like walking, talking, dog-like people, almost like werewolves, as you can imagine, bipedal anthropomorphic wolf-like creatures. And of course, I was curious. And as I approached them, I could see, because I have seen a lot of werewolves on the real side, and they do exist, and they are very animalistic and beast-like, but you also see a lot of people in wolf-like forms, which are not bestial as such. They're just another expression, another body form and vehicle for experiencing in creation. And these particular group of these wolf-like beings had little backpacks on. They were wandering with their little backpacks. So it was very interesting. So naturally, being curious as I am, I went up to engage with them. And as it transpired, they were actually Native American Indians. And I asked them, well, why are you in the form of wolves? And they said, well, we get a lot of hassle, not only on the physical level, but also on the real side. And so we always shape shift our forms to that, so we can't be identified. And as I said at the beginning, as I was speaking, I mean, whatever limitations there are through the physical, through the consciousness, even though they don't exist on the real side, the majority of one-dimensional individuals, unconscious individuals, will take those limitations with them on the real side and assume they are just as limited. And so you'll see most unconscious individuals in the forms that they are on the physical, whereas they can actually change their form at will. It's just a thought away. And these Native Americans, as I said, the fact they were on this island was an indication of their awareness, but also that they were also aware enough that they knew they were not limited to whatever the limitations were that were in the overall consciousness on that expressed through on the physical. And they had basically the shape-shifting abilities on the real side and would adopt these wolf-like forms to disguise themselves so they weren't hassled. And that was one of my encounters with Native Americans. And I spoke with them. And that was one of the first times when I had verification from them as well. And this group of Native Americans in their little wolf forms, they informed me that practically a vast majority of the mainstream alternative researchers putting out their alternative theories are controlled by the reptilians and are reptilians themselves. And they actually gave me a number of names specifically, which I've never revealed because I don't want to sort of cause any animosities or anything with the individuals involved. But and so I thought that was quite interesting. So I thought I would add that.
And they have clans. I mean, the tribes, clans, and this is kind of seems like a natural with indigenous people. And you let only those you trust into the group. That kind of seems to make sense, that to live that way, and that's what we're promoting too, is self-sufficient communities. And again, down here in Mexico, we're not going to let just anybody kind of in what we're doing when we start our projects. People have to be sincere, and they have to be focused and ready to contribute, and want to be, want to wake up. And if not, they can go their way. It's like in some of the tribes, if you're not with the community, they just tell you to leave, or they just kick you out. They don't put you in jail or harm you. They just kick you out when you don't have access to the community resources anymore. You can have on your own. So maybe that's where you want to be. I don't know, but Indians do have this clannish tribal kind of setup organization, which seems to make sense with the environment and how it works. So anyway, thanks, Kevin and Tim. Go ahead, Kevin.
This real side experience would begin with a view of a situation between two species of alien. It was one of those experiences where the visuals was rather convoluted, too much going on and compounded in too short a space of time, and for the personal self alone would have meant very little, other than scene after scene of some kind of a conflict, had it not been for the real awareness impressions. It would be all too easy to dismiss such an experience as a nonsensical mishmash of imagery. The overall impression then was of two species of alien, though their exact natures and appearances I couldn't determine, wasn't made available to my personal self. The two alien species had maintained a kind of alliance or stability for the longest time, perhaps thousands of years. The sense was of a great duration anyway. But during this period, the alliance had been shaky, fraught with a complication and conflict of interests. Though tentative as it was, peace was perpetuated, until more recently, where, for whatever reason, war broke out between the species. Again, the sense of this conflict that followed was of an equally lengthy duration, and also these two alien species were somehow intrinsically linked with each other, despite the situation between them, as though they were offshoots that stemmed from the same species initially, and it was only that fact which had maintained the peace between the two branches of a species that had differentiated genetically in some way at some point in the species' history. But evidently this bond was not enough. One of the species was victorious, and although the other was not destroyed, what happened in fact was that they accepted and were resigned to surrendering themselves to the victors, and rather merged with them. In other words, rather aligned with the interests of the victorious alien species, interests that had differed from their own, hence the seeming necessity for war. All this nonsense, attitudes of the personal self, manifesting as a conflict and altercation, seemed to be mainly then for the agreement of the wants and ideas of one species to be accepted by the other, but also with the situation resolved, and the alien victors, having assimilated the other species into agreement and acquiescence, now had the intention, it seems, to invade or make their presence known on the earth. As a future view, certainly, I'm uncertain how far into the cause and effect future this may be, but my impression was this alien species conflict had concluded in very recent moments, and this potential Earth invasion imminent. What would play out next was a view of agreement, and how the distribution of it, its placement, would determine what would transpire on the planet Earth. For as we know, everything is based on agreement. Nothing can infringe upon a species' experience overall unless there is agreement. This would include then global alien invasion. A situation on a global scale, featuring in everybody's experience, would require then everybody's consent or agreement to the particulars and specifics of the situation idea, consciously or unconsciously. This agreement placement was played out as a scene in my very street, almost as a microcosm, indication of the distribution of a global agreement for the alien invasion. For the very aliens in question would flood into my street initially, and therefore openly make their presence known on the physical, as there they would be, effectively standing in full view of the personal self, representing houses. The sense was that the aliens didn't represent a threat to humanity. They weren't there to zap everyone with ray guns. Quite possibly then they had agreed to make their presence known and represent perhaps more an intervention into the controlled affairs of the slave humans. I still was not privy to the appearance of these aliens, just that they were there, but as though their species identity was concealed from my personal self. But then another group of individuals would enter the scene. These were far more brutish, military-type characters, and indeed would intercept and round up the aliens that were encroaching on this street. The aliens would all be lined up in columns by the enforcing military group and prepared to be marched from the scene. This suggested that this alien intervention had been blocked and prevented from taking place by what was most likely the Earth controlling reptilians, as the reptilians surely were not too taken with the notion of anything upsetting their agenda for the continued locking down and restriction of their human slaves. But then suddenly a huge surge of Native American Indians entered the street, and by sheer numbers alone prevented the removal of the invading aliens. And what followed after that was a further surge of another group of individuals, looking predominantly Western and white, that seemed to back the wants and dictates of the reptilian militia to prevent the aliens from intervening, and also then allowing them to be escorted from the street by the militia reptilians. We had rather a Mexican standoff, to coin a phrase. As I said, this seemed to be a representation of agreement that allows human experience to unfold in accordance. What we seemed to have here was Native American Indians, though my sense was that they represented a far larger body of individuals, incorporating predominantly those that still held closer to their indigenous roots and to the natural environment, such as Aborigines and peoples of this nature, and this overall group had agreement for this alien species to carry out its intervention. They backed the aliens, in other words. And on the other side, so to speak, we had peoples of the earth who were far more brainwashed, industrialized, indoctrinated, and one-dimensional. Everyone, of course, being disconnected generally from the real awareness, and the effects then of their personal selves, though those such as the Native Americans a little more free-flowing and open with their conscious agreements. The second group here that backed the reptilians had been then far more completely programmed into agreement to the controllers and the ideas they wished actualized into a human experience, mainly agreement to control on a subconscious level, as the Native Americans would also have been, as every human is, but with this second group on a conscious level also. Though in more recent times has been the shift of conscious understanding as to the control systems, and so such individuals would also stand with the first group, represented by the Indians here. As such, those completely programmed and in agreement unconsciously and consciously to the controlling reptilians backed their dictates, agreeing effectively to this alien intervention not taking place, agreeing utterly to the perpetuation and continued restriction of themselves. And so overall we had this agreement stalemate, an alien species poised on intervention, the reptilian controllers preventing them, and the outcome dependent also on the placement of human species agreement, which would either facilitate the successful alien intervention or the blocking of it. And here it seemed then to be a fairly even distribution of human agreement, and as such was not decisive either way, like a potentiality of an event on the verge, but not able to be actualized. The difference of agreement being overall based on a conscious agreement, I would suggest, dependent on the percentages of those waking up to what's taking place and those that are not, with overall subconscious agreement to control aside, as this would be pretty constant as humanity's lifetimes of a programmed agreement to control across the full spectrum of humanity. The only uncontrolled variable then would be the conscious waking up of humanity and the percentages of those doing so. This then was represented as these 4 groups: the aliens, the reptilians, the awakening humans, and those still asleep, all locked together in this street with no resolve, although it had to be said that the fact that everybody was in the open street did suggest at least the agreement and acceptance to the notion of aliens generally, as the sheer volume of information, documentaries, the movies, etc., regarding aliens have prepared humanity for this possibility and the greater acceptance of intelligent life beyond this planet. It's just that the agreement to control is enough to nullify the possibility of an alien intervention taking place at this moment, though as it seemed it was a pretty even distribution of the 2 bodies of agreement, although even as the greater proportion of humanity was in the open, accepting of alien existence and all that such might potentially entail, interventions or invasions, etc., there were a small percentage that were not, and this smaller percentage were locked in their personal self-homes, peering out of the windows of houses in this street, knowing something was taking place, but unwilling to venture beyond the comfort zones of their established personal selves, the sort of individuals that can't even entertain any notion of anything beyond the limited, decided routine of their physical level, one-dimensional existences. Such people would be in a more limited position and view than even those in conscious agreement to the controlling systems, for they at least, even though representing resistance to the alien intervention, were open to the possibility of aliens, they were out in the street. There was also one other small percentage of this overall mass of individuals, and these would be standing with the group that were in conscious agreement with the controllers and representing alien intervention resistance, though this smaller group didn't seem especially passionate and driven as to their stance on the matter, as the two main groups here were. They just stood rather nonchalantly with those in conscious agreement with the reptilians. In fact, although human in appearance and going undetected by everybody, they were entities that had stolen the physical human vehicles they inhabited. Evil, ill-intended, twisted beings, not having reached a stage of awareness where they had earned, if you will, the right and position to be human, but had rather hijacked the vehicles through the various means that this is possible. For such beings as entities, if they took a physical form, it would be one and placed in such a position in creation that aligns with and reflects the overall nature of the consciousness of such ill-intended individuals. We might imagine all kinds of nightmarish, hellish-like physical worlds where such entities would be placed, if assuming a physical form, as our positioning in life equals the construction of the decided and created consciousness. And then, according to their decisions and choices, might they slowly extricate themselves from such positions, and perhaps eventually assume a position as a species that mirrors and equals the more beneficial and making sense with life decisions they have then chosen, which allows this progression through the body forms and species. But here we had then entities usurping physical vehicles and operating in worlds they had not earned in a sense, and naturally they would conduct themselves as you might imagine. The most abrasive human individuals and heinous actions could well be attributed to human vehicles stolen by such dark and twisted entities, the paedophiles, murderers, etc. And so this small entity group here were unseen by the two groups of humanity, as they were unable to see through the surface outward appearance. But the entities were apparent to my real awareness discernment, for as much as their human body forms may have seemed very normal to the personal self, I saw them as distorted and malformed. The real awareness, always able to oversee everything in creation, as is its greater view of all the ideas, attitudes, and intents that make up creation, and not just the surface layer we are presented with on the physical, and from the perspective and limited view of the personal self. And indeed, as I approached a few of these entities, they would go into a crazed rage and attack me with various stabbing implements, such as knives and meat cleavers. But regardless, their agreement seemed to side with the group that were in conscious agreement to the reptilian control system, and represented then additional resistance and a block to the aliens' ability to invade and intervene in human affairs.
Yeah, I kind of didn't get the whole idea of it, but there was a stalemate I see it as like a cat, not, you know, cat in the jungle not wanting to attack unless it's got the advantage, because it doesn't want to take the chance to get injured, and then it's all through. So there's a stalemate. Can you kind of go over it again? There's stalemate with the, who are the two groups, the alien groups?
Okay, let me briefly go over the whole thing again, just in a quick fire form.
Yeah.
I had a view of an alien species long ago that differentiated into two branches that stemmed from the original species. They were therefore intrinsically linked, like genetically sort of close cousin type alien species, almost like genetic offshoots from an original source. And that was what maintained their truce with each other due to the bond that they shared. However, that didn't seem to be enough. And as they were two differentiated species, they also had a differentiated social consciousnesses, which obviously were then not entirely in alignment with each other. And although there was a truce that was maintained, it was an unstable and delicate affair. And ultimately, because of the differences in them, and generally with differences in social consciousnesses, so you have species that tend to get into conflict with each other based on the differences that are within the social consciousnesses between the two groups. That seems to be the inclination of most personal self attitude-driven individuals in this simulator. And as such, they had a conflict. One overcame the other, and the result of it was an integration then of one branch of this species, then accepting the social consciousness then of the other, and so it was integrated and all assimilated into one overall species with the same then integrated and aligned social consciousness. And then as one then collective species once again, it was that they then decided to intervene in the affairs of humanity. And originally I thought, I had the impression it was an invasion, but as things would transpire in the experience, it turned out that they were going to intervene in the affairs of humanity, but from a more beneficial, making sense with the life perspective. It's very possible they were therefore backed by the real guides, because like a lot of these alien groups who are trying to make their presence known on the planet, the guides are backing them, and they're trying to do so in order to facilitate a great wake up, which then is the first stage, that people can wake up to more than what they currently are. Then the step beyond that will be into the isness and the recognition of the true reality, etc. And so that's what the guides are trying to negotiate with aliens to bring about. But of course, as with everything, as it is a simulation that is dependent on agreement that the experiences be so, nothing can feature in the experience of an individual or collective species unless there's agreement for those particulars. And so that's basically what was going on. A simulation, then an experience of an alien intervention that can't be so unless there's enough agreement that it is. And of course, with the dark force controllers, they have agreements through the subconscious predominantly that dictates that they control effectively humanity's simulation, and so naturally they do not want any aliens that are coming in to intervene in human affairs, which could potentially represent a humanity's wake-up situation, which would disrupt their control of humanity. Because obviously humanity starts to wake up, that then sets the ball rolling, into which it could kickstart an awareness process where they lose control of their human slaves, and then ultimately they're losing the agreements that support their control of the entire simulator ultimately. And so they don't want any aliens to come in and intervene unless they are aliens working on behalf of them that will then be part of their control system, or even to use aliens or alien factions of their own dark forces in order to pull off what would be like alien invasions and destroy humanity as one of their potential depopulation agendas. And so the situation was that they had that through their subconscious control of humanity, they have agreements such that it is very hard to pull these alien invasion interventions off that are beneficial. But on the other hand, there is the conscious agreement to consider as well, because even though the majority of the consciousness, the greater proportion of it is subconscious, there is the element of it that is conscious. And so with conscious agreement to the aliens and their intervention. So will that then start to shift agreement in the favour of alien interventions, beneficial alien interventions possibly becoming so? And so it's a bit of a surface level agreement, surface level battle, almost vying for where the agreement stands. And in this experience, it was agreement generally divided between those who are completely 100% controlled, subconsciously and consciously, and those who are consciously waking up. Obviously, underlying all of it, even with the ones who are consciously waking up, would be the subconscious agreements, which is still a massive factor. But what was being played for here was the conscious agreements, and it seemed that depending on where the pendulum swung in regards to conscious agreement could dictate whether or not this alien intervention could take place. And so where the line in the sand fell between those who were consciously in agreement with the controllers as well, which would be like 100% personal, self-immersed, one-dimensional individuals, and then obviously on the other side of the line would be those who are consciously waking up to the control systems, and those would include the Native Americans, all the Aboriginal people, a lot of the indigenous peoples, all the people who are waking up and so on. And so that's where the divide line was, and it was rather hanging in the balance, rather a Mexican standoff, if you will. And as Dwayne has said, the Native Americans are very precious and very important because they have a lot of connections with a lot of other alien factors and individuals throughout the dimensions of the simulator as well. So their agreements can swing agreements very drastically in one way or the other because of all the affiliations that they have. And so that's why they were also featuring this experience and were a very key factor in the possibility of these alien interventions taking place. And so basically that's how the situation was. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that clears it up. Thanks. Yes, it's agreement. It's all about agreement. You can force somebody to do something, but you get backlash eventually. And they see that. They see that there's going to be cause and effect playing into forcing themselves on people. But if there's agreement, hey, that's another story. You know, if you can trick somebody into agreeing with you, or for the ill or not, and for the benefit, more so the better. But beyond even that is the focus on the is, which will, in a way, there doesn't have to be conflict then at all, because you're just focused on, you're so absorbed in this reality that you don't have, there's no, you know, everybody's in a way on the same page, or it doesn't lend itself to conflict, really. It lends itself to cooperation, and that it's for cooperation for the benefit of everybody, not just one group. So here we are. Yeah, so thanks, Kevin, again. Anything else, anybody, or should we just do the new you now and cut it off?
Yeah, I was going to say that RealCourage experience that took place, I think, around March or February of this year. So we're talking about, you know, a good 6 or 7 months ago now. And so, as I said, I've had a lot of experiences regarding possible alien interventions, also possible alien invasions, both on the beneficial and the negative side, as have a lot of other individuals. And like, again, what happens always is dependent on agreement. And so as agreement shifts back and forth through all the free will that's out there, you never know for certain what you see on the real side that's actually going to manifest. You only see how the agreement stands at the moment you were afforded these real awareness future views. And so nothing you see on the real side is necessarily set in stone. But as I've also revealed on the real side, if I see things transpiring in my street, it's very strong indication that it is very close or on the verge to being a physical level actuality. And so that experience, what did occur in my street, but nevertheless, it hasn't obviously come to pass as far as we know. So, but literally, Dwayne has said, there are literally fleets and fleets of aliens all around the planet and all their various spacecraft, and there's more joining them by the day. I have constant real side experiences where I see yet another race of beings heading their star fleet towards Earth. I see a lot of that, and so the Earth is a massive focus with all these aliens because of the fact that Dwayne is here with the new presentation, and it literally, the planet Earth does represent the center of creation at the moment, where the ears is focused as almost like its base of operations, and so there's massive attention and interest on this planet, and this, like, you know, so it's just a case of through agreements what occurs in regards to these aliens, but these things could happen at any moment, any day. I mean, you literally could have an Independence Day situation happening tomorrow, you know, so it's just depends on how agreements shape up, but yeah.
We had sightings here in Rosarito, north of us, not too long ago, and Tim's granddaughter took some pictures of some ships the other day. It was really, really clear, really good pictures, photos there, Tim. Did your granddaughter take those?
Yeah, she took them. We were up on the mountain, and the cloud formations were very interesting, and behind it was the first good rain that come, so they were pulling it in. There is a video too, but I don't know, I haven't figured out how to send it, and it shows a lot more of them. Same time, just yeah, I haven't had many experiences seeing the things that were make you wonder what they are, but some I have. All right.
Spoke on the show about how you saw a light in the sky, and it was moving from one position to another instantaneously, and it was being pursued by jet fighters that were coming from a nearby airbase and things of that nature. So. Yeah, that was a very interesting experience. Waiting for my father. He commuted across Puget Sound there from Clinton on Whidbey Island, the south end, to Mukilteo is the mainland. It's 3.5 miles across. And my mother would drive down to pick him up on this side to come home every evening after work. And he'd have a car on the other side to get to work on that side, because it costs more to pay every day to commute with a car than it does just a passenger. But I was waiting on the dock, which was normal. I'd go out to meet him out on the dock when the ferry would dock out there. And yeah, while the ferry was coming in, there was that light that was in the sky and very visible, and wondering, what is that? Hadn't seen anything like that before. And there's the Mukilteo has a Naval Air Force base there, and they had the fighter jets. They were swept wing back then, and that was probably the end of the 50s or in the 60s, earlier 60s. And they, yeah, I'm looking at this light, wondering what it is, and then the two jets, one right after the other, going right up out at it, directly at it, and it started pulsating. It was slow at first, and it just kept going faster and faster and brighter and brighter, and all of a sudden it's like it was almost like a flickering, and it just disappeared. So that gets your attention to what in the heck was going on. And then it appeared right away, looking over to Everett, which was some miles away, and there was the same light appeared over there. Those kind of things really get your attention because they're so rare, and you wonder what they are, and it gets your interest into the flying saucers and things like that, about things that you wonder about life, not only on Earth. And yeah, who knows what you could see. I do see it as an interference with mankind. If beings come down, and it just depends what they do. It would be where would their limit be? Would they be like we call the reptilians? Instead, all of a sudden they just
desire certain things from this world instead of just being pure-hearted for the benefit of everything, all. Who knows? It's just another experience I think I'd like to see happen about the effects on mankind from beings communicating in some way or another here on Earth this time. Yeah, there's some interesting things that are what I guess we call unusual. I think most people have certain amounts of experiences that they wonder about, whether it's their what's that stuff called, deja vu or things like that. So who knows? But this whole world sure seems like it could use some real God that's caring and that fixes stuff up. Just get rid of all the problems. But I guess these lessons are what's needed.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Kevin. We'll end it with the new you here, and see you next time. New you. Tim?
New you.
And Kevin?
You.